Your system is useless. No way I'm paying for this. Daniel, the sales director of our client company, laughed mockingly as he shouted at me. Tools aren't to blame. No matter how excellent they are, they become useless depending on the user. Well then, the contract is terminated. Of course. I never want to see the face of someone who drifts around without a proper job, uninstall the system along with the data, and disappear. Following Daniel's orders, I began uninstalling the software I had brought in. Will this completely delete everything? Of course, let me confirm. Are you sure this is what you want? Don't make me repeat myself. Hurry up and delete it. Daniel hurried me as I reconfirmed. Hurry up and do it. Daniel made me press the delete command. This command was crucial enough to change my life, but he never realized it. One click can turn your life around. My name is David Wilson. Up until last month, I worked at a system development company, but my side project reached an unexpectedly high level of completion. I wanted more flexibility and freedom to explore its potential. Driven by various impulses, I decided to go independent. Although there were some anxieties about running my own business at the age of 42, by the time I felt the urge to test my abilities further, I had already taken action. I had no complaints about the company I left. In fact, I considered it an excellent workplace. I will never forget my gratitude towards President Miller. You've been a great help. I struggled with the idea of you leaving, but I can't hold back a man with a burning desire to venture out. President Miller was an admirable person who had founded the company after going independent himself. He would often share stories of the hardships during the company's early days at banquets, while the new employees would listen reluctantly. I loved hearing these heroic tales from President Miller, whose eyes would light up with determination as if he had returned to those days. Looking back, perhaps his influence strongly impacted my decision to go independent. Good luck. You are my pride. What I'm about to do could become a competitor to the company. I asked the president if he was okay with supporting me so openly. Don't hesitate, instead, surpass me before I die. With those words, President Miller laughed heartily. Amazingly, President Miller handed me several projects. He called it a bonus with my severance pay, but it was far too generous to be just a bonus. At first, I planned to get contracts on my own by pounding the pavement and working steadily. While it was very appreciated, I couldn't rely on the company I left for everything. However, President Miller insisted that these projects were only possible because of my efforts, and he wouldn't back down. The beginning is crucial. Use this to gain momentum, he said with those determined eyes, making it impossible to refuse his generosity. Perhaps I had ignited a dormant passion within President Miller. Today, I was visiting a client that he had referred to me. The client was mid-sized or larger within the industry, ranking among the top of those I managed in my previous job. President Johnson, a client from my former company, seemed to have introduced me to another company he had connections with. President Johnson contacted President Miller after learning about my resignation. After hearing about my decision to go independent, he considered entrusting this project to me. Feeling the support from so many people naturally boosted my confidence. I've heard about this new system, and it's advanced and very intriguing. However, I want to see firsthand if it's truly reliable. President Taylor, the head of my first client, had a valid point. I was confident in what I had created, but getting it recognized was a different story. My system managed basic functions like customer list management and pickup, and it visualized customer satisfaction. It analyzed recorded voices from calls to determine emotional swings using an algorithm and graphed them. This method was more reliable and less cumbersome than surveys, whose responses might not be truthful. However, gaining trust from companies was challenging because it used AI. Anticipating this, I recorded our conversation today. I apologize for this, and I'm sincerely sorry, I said. President Taylor accepted my explanation, understanding it was necessary. I had the system analyze the sampled voice. Seeing the results, I realized I'd been outsmarted. You were never suspicious from the start, were you? I said. President Taylor laughed heartily. It was a recommendation from President Johnson. Besides, this is impressive. If this line goes up, it means positive, right? I was thrilled by President Taylor's enthusiastic response and explained everything with energy. Of course, I secured the contract. Though I'm on a business trip today, there's a sales director named Daniel. I'll have him handle the detailed checks. Make sure to teach him how to use it properly. At the end of our conversation, President Taylor told me this. I readily agreed, but this would become the worst encounter of my life. I don't get it. Daniel, the sales director, had the same reaction after my third explanation. I thought I had explained it as clearly as possible, but he didn't seem to understand. No, he probably wasn't trying to understand. Sprawled on the couch with his hands resting on the armrest, he showed no sign of enthusiasm. Do we really need something like this? It's such a hassle. I tried to persuade him politely, but the more deferential I was, the more arrogant Daniel became. That's enough. I have to go entertain a client now. I'll contact you if I have more questions. Without giving me a chance to respond, Daniel left. Despite feeling disheartened by his treatment, I was determined to make my first deal a success and encouraged myself. The next morning, I was awakened by a loud ringtone. Daniel's name was displayed on the screen. You're late. How long are you going to keep me waiting? The call started with a loud yell echoing in my ears. I apologized, and Daniel snorted in response. I don't understand how to use this. Get here immediately. Don't take too long. He abruptly ended the call, and I grumbled internally about compliance. But maybe this is just the harsh reality of the outside world. I had no backing or track record at this point. So, I told myself firmly that I had to prove myself with sincerity and skill. How long did it take you? You weren't having breakfast, were you? As soon as I arrived at the office, he interrogated me. When I explained I got there as quickly as possible, he scolded me for making excuses. You're also too slow to answer the phone. I told you I'd call again. I apologize. I was actually working late into the night on this for you, Daniel. In truth, I had stayed up late creating a manual to demonstrate my abilities to Daniel. It was incredibly detailed, just for him. Oh. Even Daniel wouldn't be able to say he didn't understand after seeing this. As he flipped through the manual, he spoke. Are you mocking me? I was stunned by his completely unexpected reaction. Are you trying to brush me off with a piece of paper? Why don't you explain it to me yourself? He accused me of having no sincerity. My patience was reaching its limit. I tried explaining, but it seemed difficult for you to understand. I inadvertently blurted out. Daniel's brows furrowed. Are you insulting me? How dare you speak to a client like that? I'm very sorry. I didn't mean it that way. I quickly apologized, coming to my senses. Daniel demanded that I show sincerity if I was going to apologize. Listen, I have a business meeting today. If you want to show sincerity, you need to take responsibility for sending the data to the president. Wait a minute, that's too much. You're not saying it's impossible, right? You're going to show sincerity, aren't you? This situation is because your system is hard to use. Isn't this your responsibility? The humiliation burned deeply. My prized creation was ridiculed, and I was forced to take on unrelated tasks. But losing my temper here would betray the expectations of those who supported me. I clenched my fists and endured. Understood. I'll send all the data to the president. Daniel left, speaking forcefully about not making any mistakes. Hey, what's going on here? Explain. As soon as we met, Daniel started yelling. He had called me again early in the morning, demanding an explanation. Given the previous incident, I couldn't just tell him to refer to the manual, so I had come in person. What do you mean by what's going on? The manual I had given him was carelessly placed on his desk. Seeing the bent pages, it was clear he had hastily tried to study it. Why is my graph so low? I quickly understood why Daniel was furious as I looked at his computer. As I explained before, the AI reads emotions from voices and graphs them. I know that. I'm asking why my graph is low. I'm very sorry to say this, but your customers had negative reactions to your interactions. In reality, it was much harsher than that. The reactions to Daniel were almost all less than half of the average. I wanted to ask what kind of interactions could make the graph drop this low. Ridiculous. What can this machine know? Is it broken? He started making absurd complaints, but everything was functioning correctly. Looking at the data of other employees, everyone but Daniel was far above average. You're a con artist for selling such a fraudulent product to the company. I suspected you from the start, especially when I heard you were a freelancer. Daniel continued his tirade. A man your age without a steady job, just drifting around, you must have been unwanted and without a place in any company. The moment I heard that insult, something snapped inside me. Not saying anything back after all this felt disrespectful to the people who genuinely supported me. That's enough, I replied with a firm tone. I had reached my limit, and I didn't want to deal with this man anymore. Seeing my reaction, Daniel seemed eager to seize the moment and opened his mouth wide. The defects in your system have been exposed, and now your true colors are showing. Your junk system, made by a scammer, is worthless. I'm not paying a cent. He continued to rant. I looked at Daniel silently, my gaze filled with anger. Oh, struck a nerve, did I? Let me say it again then. Your system is useless. No way I'm paying for this. Well then, the contract is terminated. There's no reason to continue a contract when they refuse to pay. I wasn't sure if Daniel even had the authority to say such things, but there was no need to endure this any longer. Daniel neither tried to understand how to use the system nor realized his mistake. Without realizing the consequences would come back to him. Of course, I never want to see the face of someone who drifts around without a job. Uninstall the system and disappear. Following Daniel's orders, I began uninstall the software I had brought in. This will really delete everything, right? Of course, just to confirm once more, are you sure you want to delete it? Don't make me repeat myself. Hurry up and delete it. Daniel rushed me as I reconfirmed. I wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible too. Hurry up and do it. Daniel made me execute the command to delete the data, and all the data was deleted. Good. Now that it's gone, I have no more use for you. Get lost. He waved his hand dismissively. He was endlessly rude, but he was probably relieved inside. I knew why Daniel was in such a hurry. President Taylor was on a short business trip and was scheduled to return today. He probably wanted to delete everything before any incriminating data could be seen. While he succeeded in destroying evidence, my presence made him nervous. He was desperate to get rid of me. It was truly pathetic. I realized how fortunate I had been to be surrounded by good people in a supportive environment. What are you standing around for? Never come near this company again. Just as Daniel shouted that. What's going on here? It's awfully noisy. President Taylor appeared with a stern expression. Seeing the carry-on in his hand, he must have come directly back to the office. Daniel, who had been so aggressive a moment ago, quickly straightened up. President Taylor, it's a pleasure to see you. President, you're back early. How was the trip? It seemed Taylor had returned much sooner than expected. Realizing that Taylor might have heard his shouting, Daniel desperately tried to change the subject. However, President Taylor was not someone who could be easily deceived. He looked at Daniel with a puzzled expression and asked again. I asked what's going on. Why is David Wilson here? And what was that shouting about? Well, you see, Daniel coughed theatrically, blinking and wiping the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. I found a defect in his system. A defect. President Taylor's eyebrows twitched. Yes, an undeniable defect. Without explaining what the defect was, Daniel pushed the conversation forward forcefully. I became suspicious and had him delete the system and data. He's a scammer trying to sell defective products, President. I see, President Taylor said, appearing to ponder Daniel's words. And what does that mean exactly? Slowly crossing his arms, he mentioned a name. You're saying that President Johnson introduced a scammer to our company, right? What? Daniel's voice cracked at the mention of that name. Naturally, Daniel had no idea that I came here through President Johnson's introduction or about my relationship with him. Why is President Johnson's name involved? Daniel's eyes darted around in confusion. Why, because President Johnson personally recommended David Wilson as highly competent. Isn't that right, David? President Taylor looked at me. Daniel was speechless with shock. He never imagined I had a connection with such an important client. Yes, President Johnson has been very supportive since I was with my previous company. Just recently, he even treated me to dinner to celebrate my independence. That's how it is, Daniel. So, are you seriously claiming that President Johnson, a valued partner of ours, sent a scammer to our company? President Taylor's eyes bore into Daniel. A stifled sound came from Daniel's throat. Even though he didn't know, he not only questioned the introduction from a client, but also treated me extremely disrespectfully. If President Johnson heard about this from me, it wouldn't end well. I had no intention of bringing up such an unpleasant topic with President Johnson, but Daniel must have been feeling uneasy. No, President. But Daniel wasn't one to back down easily. He had to be incredibly thick-skinned to treat others the way he did. You're both being fooled by him. This guy is selling a dubious product with AI that has no credibility. He desperately tried to push his flimsy excuse. Daniel refused to retreat. However, baseless emotional arguments wouldn't work on President Taylor. The more he struggled, the deeper he sank into the quagmire. He didn't seem to grasp the situation he was in at all. Is that so? I was quite impressed with it. President Taylor, with his hand on his chin, squinted thoughtfully. In contrast to the agitated Daniel, he remained calm. He brushed off Daniel's heated accusations as if they were a gentle breeze. No, that stuff is all fake. I personally ensured that such bogus records were deleted. I thought it was well made, President Taylor said as he took a laptop out of his carry-on case. What are you doing, sir? Daniel questioned, but President Taylor ignored him, placing the laptop on the desk and waking it from sleep mode. Well, I couldn't understand these so-called flaws you mentioned, he said. The screen displayed a list of employee names. He seemed to have already familiarized himself with the operation. With a few clicks, the familiar graphs appeared. Look here. This is the data since David's system was implemented. Jones in sales is cheerful and lively, so these are joy indicators. Williams gives a calm impression, which seems to reflect high customer assurance scores. As he praised the employee's performance, he explained the graphs in detail, clearly enjoying himself. From his explanations, it was evident that the characteristics matched the graphs perfectly. I could confidently say the system was reliable. But Daniel didn't seem to be paying attention. He was trembling and his eyes were wide open in shock. Why is the data still here? Daniel's plan fell apart, and he questioned in a hoarse voice. I knew this would happen from the moment he ordered me to delete the data. That's why I complied with his order. Didn't you delete everything? Daniel angrily confronted me, almost grabbing me. I replied calmly. Yes, of course, I deleted all the company data. As per Daniel's instructions, I had indeed deleted both the system and the remaining data. He had seen that moment himself, and while there were recovery options, they couldn't be executed in mere minutes. You're lying. The data is still here. You really are a scammer. Daniel, filled with anger and confusion, pointed aggressively at the screen. I'm not lying. I deleted the data as per your instructions. But there was something Daniel didn't know. However, The president liked it so much that he asked for a personal copy. What? That short exclamation was enough to convey Daniel's agitation. Yes, President Taylor had been so impressed that he made an additional personal contract separate from the company one. Naturally, the data was transferred not only to the company, but also to President Taylor personally. It was as if President Taylor was waiting for me to reveal this fact when he spoke up. Why are you so flustered, Daniel? Is there something inconvenient about the data being retained? No, of course not. As soon as Daniel denied it, President Taylor clapped his hands. Oh, right. Now I remember, your graph had quite low numbers. President Taylor said, pretending to recall, and moved the cursor to select Daniel from the list. The graph displayed was the complete opposite of the high-performing employees. A disappointing graph was exposed in front of us. Well, that is. Daniel stammered, and President Taylor pressed further. You don't mean to say that you tried to hide this by making David delete the data, do you? These words hit the mark. President Taylor's words gradually cornered Daniel, pushing him to the edge. You're misunderstanding, President. Daniel flailed his arms dramatically, as if drowning in the ocean. He continued his futile resistance, refusing to give up. He tried to frame me. He tampered with the graphs. For the umpteenth time, Daniel made a desperate claim. President Taylor sighed deeply and asked with a hint of exasperation, what benefit would David gain from doing that? Daniel hesitated, then pointed at me and shouted loudly. He hated me from the beginning. His attitude was bad, and his responses were sloppy. That was far from the truth. I had explained everything thoroughly and even made a dedicated manual. Regardless of personal feelings, I had handled everything meticulously. President, are you going to trust this machine over someone who has worked with you for years? In the end, you should trust a person's voice, not graphs or data. Listen to my voice, just as it is. Daniel looked at President Taylor as if he had just given a grand speech. You're right. In the end, what you can truly trust are a person's voice and feelings. That's why. President Taylor said as he reached for the laptop and clicked the play button. That's disappointing. The next moment, a scratchy recording began to play. Are you trying to brush me off with a piece of paper? Why don't you explain it to me yourself? Are you insulting me? How dare you speak to a client like that? The recording captured Daniel's various outbursts towards me. He was speechless, but the audio continued. With Daniel's angry shouts and sarcastic remarks in the background, President Taylor spoke. This is the real voice you mentioned, Daniel. Even without the system, it's clear. You're very angry, selfish, rude, and arrogant. How could? Daniel's voice trembled as he struggled to speak. I addressed him clearly and calmly, so the message would sink into his bewildered mind. You said it yourself. You must have heard it on the recording just now. As per your instructions, I sent the data to the president with sincerity and responsibility. I took a breath and added, You asked for all the data to be sent, including the audio recordings I had at the time. I pulled out the voice recorder from my pocket. President Miller had given it to me as a bonus, saying it would be useful if I ever went independent. I never thought it would come in handy like this. It was given to me by someone concerned about my lack of support. I hoped I'd never have to use it, but thanks to you, that hope didn't come true. No. It seemed the voice recorder had a significant impact. Daniel finally seemed to give up, hanging his head in defeat. There was no way for him to reverse the situation now. Accepting his loss, Daniel closed his mouth and remained motionless. President Taylor approached me. On behalf of my company, I deeply apologize for the trouble caused. He spoke clearly and apologized deeply. Please, President Taylor, raise your head. I am grateful to you for believing in me. President Taylor finally raised his head and turned his gaze to the bewildered Daniel. I had intended to trust you. When I returned, I planned to talk with you. Have you apologized to David? and work on improving your approach to customer interactions based on the graph data. President Taylor genuinely believed in Daniel. Even with his mistreatment of me and poor customer service, he thought Daniel could admit his mistakes and change. But you betrayed that trust. Instead of facing your mistakes, you tried to cover them up and went as far as to call David a scammer. It's inexcusable. By deleting the data, Daniel had destroyed any hope he had left. This system is meant to visualize customer satisfaction and help you identify areas for improvement. Thinking that a low graph means just a bad evaluation is incredibly short-sighted. Short-sighted? Daniel reacted slightly, perhaps troubled by my words. Yes, you were so focused on immediate judgment that you rushed to delete the data, and in doing so, you missed your last chance. If that's not short-sighted, what is? The effort to improve is what truly matters, but you ran away from the problems you needed to face.